Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the workshop. It is fantastic to have you here as ever while I am still on my trip out of this country. Now, I need a way to store my welding hoods, because I got welding hoods, but I'm just gonna dump them over here, and that's no way to store welding hoods. So on today's project, we're finding a way to make a cool hook to mount these hoods. So, as I try and work out how this is naturally gonna work, i.e. this is on my head, I take it off, it's gonna be at this angle there. How's it gonna fit on a wall? It needs a hook. The hook needs to come out a fair ways. The hook needs to come out at least 4 inches, I'd say. Have a slight little uplift there, but not too much, because I can't lift up too far to get off the hook because of this. Let's see if it's any different with my other hoods. I'm working away, take that off. That's the exact same. Working away, take that off. Yeah, it's the exact same. So, naturally, you know, in terms of the basics of a hook, what is the basics of a hook? You have a 90-degree, but on here, instead of this coming back around quite aggressively, we're gonna have a 90-degree, we're gonna come out 4 inches, and I wanna build a little lip. But we need to find a way to make this an interesting thing aesthetically. So naturally, I'll have a think about what type of steel we have, what section. There's some bigger flats, some square, that needs to be here. What else do we have? This could be a nice piece, nice and chunky. I'm sure we could do some nice forging with that. And so, into the saw we go. I'm gonna feed in what I would kind of consider a handleable length, which generally kind of tends to be around kind of 26, 28, 29, 30 inches or so. I'm gonna cut a couple of these off. That way we can work multiple at a time in the fire without having to use tongs, because I don't think I have tongs that are gonna fit this. I'll lock it in the vise and we'll give it a quick zip with a rasp. Never fun working with sharp edges. Now into the forge we go. This brings me back to the good old days of doing craft fairs and having all that fun driving around the country with all my stock and having to prep for it and do things like this. You know, I wasn't making necessarily hooks like this. You know, potentially a little more decorative than this, but I remember production work at an anvil with a hand hammer. That was a fun time. Tiring work, but a fun time. So I'm gonna measure off a couple of distances here. Right there I got 3/4 of an inch. Right there I've got 4 3/4 of an inch. What that's gonna do, that's gonna give me the 4 inches out I need. That's gonna give me a 3/4 inch lip. And it's gonna mean that when I come from the fire with my hot piece of steel, imagining the ruler is the hot piece of steel, I can easily get an eyeball as to where the marks need to be, come back here and start working. Here are the tools that we're gonna be using. This is a fuller, this is a very small punch, and this is a large punch. We'll actually be doing it the other way around. Start with the large punch and then finish with the small punch when we make our mounting holes. Okay, I've actually just taken those pieces out of the fire so they're not heating up too much. That'll tend to cause them to oxidize and you then get a very crusty scale surface. A lot of you guys wonder what that gray stuff is that falls off the workpiece when we're working on the power hammer on the press, here at the hand hammer. That is scale, and it's iron oxide. It's the result of heating the iron up, or the steel up so hot that the oxygen in the atmosphere of the forge and here out in the open air is reacting with it so fast that all of this falls off, and you'll actually end up losing a lot of weight to iron oxide to your scale. But, so we don't get too thick of a coating of that, so we keep it all nice and clean, we want to make sure that we pull them out of the fire when we're still thinking, because we're still thinking. So we very handily made our marks for the first half of this hook. We have not made any marks for the side of the hook that's going to be mounted up onto the wall. So, bearing that in mind, I'm going to be pretending these next marks are going to be made from the fuller line that we make level here. I need enough distance that the diameter of my drill chuck can fit in there to screw. So we'll go 1 1/4 inches, and then we'll go another 1.5 inches up from there, and then we'll cut it 1.25 inches from there. I don't know why it is I'm speaking imperial right about now, because all those measurements were in millimeters. That was 30, 70, and 100. So I know we frequently don't kind of cover much in this much detail, but it's exciting too, because there's a lot that I necessarily, that I kind of just gloss over and see as given that people understand it, without really forgetting that a lot of you guys have never forged before, which is fantastic. because that leaves me for the opportunity to explain what I'm doing. I hold the piece of steel between my legs, and no, it's not painful. You know, you make sure your anvil isn't too high, and it's all fine. Holding the tool, pardon me, in my left hand and lining it up, striking with my right hand with the hammer, we do what the tool needs to do. It'd be very easy to be concerned about hitting your hand as you do this, but it really shouldn't be too much of a worry. The more you do it, the more you'll get used to it, the more you'll get used to just intuitively striking the top of it, and I really do think that the more you're concerned about hitting your hand, the more likely you are to hit your hand. And part of being cautious about wanting to hit your hand is a lot of people will give it a little tap and then a hard hit. But the issue is that takes a lot of time away from it. What you want to be doing is you want to be hitting and then getting that tool out of there as fast as possible, because what happens is, this tool being cold, this being hot, the hot piece of steel is putting energy into the cold tool, which is problematic for a couple of reasons. One, we like this piece of steel being hot because then it forges very easily and is beautifully malleable. Two, we don't like this being hot because the hotter that is, the more malleable it is, and we want it to stay in its nice, pretty condition for a very long time. And bearing this in mind, we want to keep that out of there as much as possible. So I'm going to come in again and we're going to be making our next mark. So I'll take my tool, give it a little prick, and then put it again between my legs. Another common issue that I see people run into that I really am not such a major fan of is holding the tool in there and hitting twice. Now, not only does that cool it down, and that's evidenced by, if I do it again, you can see there's a much deeper black spot than there would have been otherwise. But the other issue is if I hit twice, there is a certain degree of rebound up from the anvil that's going to be jumping this. And so you need to put downwards pressure on the tool. And notice, you know, we're cold already. But you need to put downwards pressure on the tool as you do it. But the worry is that it bounces up enough and you put downwards pressure again and you're in the wrong place and you miss-hit and you make a false mark. What I like to do instead is every single time I hit, I take the tool out of there. This allows me to observe the result of my last blow, observe the effects of it, and reposition the tool in the perfect place for every single blow. The workpiece is obviously now too cool for us to actually do much forging, but it's warm enough that we can indeed still do some laying out. And this is actually a nice time to do the laying out because at the colder temperatures we have more time to work with, and we don't have this big incandescent radiating heat piece of steel burning us and blinding us as we go. So the colder temperatures are truly quite fantastic for doing this little more meticulous work that's required to make sure that our holes are going to hopefully be as centered as possible. And so now at a high heat, it's perfect for me to use all of the heat to forge down with the punch. You'll notice I take the punch out with every blow. I really like doing this for the same reason that I like to take the fuller out with every blow, but it's even more critical here because we really are burying it in there. What you'll notice on the back side when you flip it over, when you get down to the level of the anvil, is you get these little bullseyes. Remember once hearing or reading Mark Asprey call these bullseyes. I'm gonna flip it over from the backside and you'll notice this is a much smaller punch. We're at a very low temperature, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna lay it out and make sure we're right in the middle there. And at this low temperature, one solid blow will shear a little plug out of there. You'll notice the plug is holding on by just a tiny little thread there. Okay, there we go. The plug is just hanging on by a little thread, and same again. And the plug there has dropped right out, and we end up with a really nice, clean, countersunk type hole. A screw's gonna be able to drop right in there and seat flush with the rest of the forge piece. I'm now gonna use this opportunity before it's been bent to go ahead and start the mark about where this is gonna be chiseled off. So I found it over there, over our Sharpie line. And we'll come in here, we'll work from side to side, and we'll bring down our chisel line. I'm not particularly interested in bringing it down all the way, but for now, with a little touch marking, we'll now be ready for our bends. You might have been asking yourself, now Alec, why on earth did you make those fuller lines in there? Well, what we do is we intentionally compromise the structure of the workpiece in the exact area that we want the bend. Now, naturally, that means that we don't end up having a hook that's as strong as this 8mm by 25mm bar. But what it does do is it gives us the opportunity to make the bends just right and just where we want them. And as you'll see, it is also a beautiful aesthetic feature in a forged piece. And so now, with that said and done, we're ready to lock that in the vise. And of course, that chisel line should indeed allow us, there we go, to be able to very cleanly, safely break that off. And just like before, I can give it a little bit of a touch up with a rasp to make sure that there are no sharp corners on it. Now, I'm often asked what finishes can be used on forged ironwork. Well, there's a whole plethora of stuff you can do. But it's worth bearing in mind to be able to have something that's gonna withstand corrosion in the outdoors, in the elements. There is nothing that you can do better than galvanizing. But this is gonna be for indoor use, so it's not gonna be out in the weather, out in the sticks. So it's perfectly fine to use a finish that's a little more simple. So here are a couple of examples of what you can do. You can use oil. This happens to be boiled linseed oil. I've had fabulous success doing finishes with plain old vegetable oil from the supermarket. And there's a beautiful hot oil finish you can do where you have an oil saturated rag, you heat the workpiece up ever so slightly. I don't know exactly how it is that it works, but what happens is the oil creates this almost plastic-like coating, and it seeps nicely into the pores of a forged surface, and it creates actually a very durable finish. You can also use yourself some wax. Here is some furniture wax, should work just fine. And here is some beeswax, and beeswax is a really fantastic finish too. Now, I've generally found that hot finishes tend to be the most durable finishes of all when it comes to your oil or your wax coatings. So here is what I was talking about earlier. This was sat just outside the forge, so we've heated it to about 500 degrees Celsius or so. And of course, as we wipe that oil on, that penetrates nice and deeply into it, creates a beautiful black finish, and it is indeed pretty durable in terms of how indoor finishes can hold up. So now this piece has been forged, but we still need another two, so it's time for me to put both in the fire, work a little faster, and crank these things out. So, these three pieces have been forged and they're ready to be mounted to the wall. So, I need some roll plugs, some screws, of course we need the hooks, we need a drill bit. In hammer mode, find a suitable screw. There we go, that'll work. And then I'll work out roughly the height that I want this stuff. I think... Yep. I'll have the bottom lining up with that cinder block there. I'll make a small little mark. Find the middle. And we'll drill a hole. Didn't drill a hole deep enough. And on take two, we put a roll plug in the wall. Make sure it's level and straight how we want it. And put the drill bit back in. Drill a hole again. Roll plug. Let's see how she works. There we go, perfect. 2 more to go. Now the ultimate test here is, can I do my quick holstering of the helmets? So it's time to pretend I'm welding. I now have proper storage for my welding helmets. This is a good day because it means I don't have to, trip over them on the floor perhaps, or have them stuffed behind here. I get to hang them up properly. It is exciting getting a nice, tidy, and organized workshop. Thank you so much for watching today's episode. I hope that you've enjoyed this very different style. Be sure to drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Hit like, subscribe if you're new, and we'll see you on the next episode. Bye-bye.